Clinton and Obama categorically defended Biden's policy in Gaza and declared their support for the Israeli state. When a protester interrupted Obama, Obama snapped back, quote, "You can't just talk and not listen. That's what the other side does."
Who's the other side? You and me preaching rule of law and peace?
Yep. You can't just talk and not listen. You have to listen to me. Don't you know who I am? I'm a little boy of nothing that sucked up to the Pritzker family. Oh, the people that own the Hyatt Hotel? Yeah, I was a little clown boy over there in Illinois. They bought my way in to run for president. I lied to the people. I told them I was all for peace. I even won the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize. Obama, quoted in a book, doubled down, I'm really good at killing people. Launched the Afghan troop surge. I got to get that guy Gaddafi out of there. Assad has to go. You have to listen. You're not allowed to think for yourself. That's America.
As more and more begin to know the status quo has got to go, they're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Haaretz, the Israeli paper, reported on Tuesday that Israel launched 3 separate drone strikes on an aid convoy in its attack that killed 7 aid workers for the World Central Kitchen. So I covered this briefly yesterday, that the fact that Israel killed these foreign aid workers in Gaza, and now more details came out about this horrific attack. And it says this report, and this is essentially the story, the official story coming out of Israel. This was citing Israeli military sources. And it said that one Israeli drone fired 3 missiles at 3 cars that were clearly marked with the World Central Kitchen's logos and were traveling on roads pre-approved by the Israeli military. So they coordinated what they were doing with the Israeli military. So again, 3 cars here. And after the first car was hit, a second car took the wounded people from the first car. And then the second car was hit with a missile. And the third car went back and picked up survivors from that strike. And then the third missile strike hit the third car and finished the job. And it killed, again, 7 aid workers, including 3 British nationals, a dual American-Canadian citizen, so an American was killed, a Palestinian was killed, an Australian, and a Polish citizen. Israeli officials have claimed that the airstrikes were a mistake, but the meticulous nature of the operation suggests that this was a targeted killing of aid workers and part of Israel's campaign to starve Palestinians. In response to this strike, several aid organizations have suspended operations in Gaza. Aid has been turned away from Gaza, and this is contributing to the starvation of Palestinians. This article's from Jason Ditz. Israeli Army Chief Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi has reportedly signed off on a plan to launch a major war on the country's northern front with Lebanon, and this comes amid growing escalation of Israeli attacks and a palpable sense that the diplomatic efforts are not gaining much momentum in avoiding the conflict. So Halevi had ordered plans prepared last month and reportedly held an assessment with the northern commander in the IDF, in which they both decided that the plan was appropriate. So Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is reportedly having his staff work on various proposals for gearing up the general public for an all-out military conflict with Hezbollah, and ominously enough, for the possibility of war with Iran. The goal, according to reports, is to raise awareness of the possibility of a war, even if one is not imminent, and not to panic, but to raise awareness. Israel's Home Front Command has long been preparing for sheltering civilians in the north in the event that, this big war breaks out. So this is what the Israelis are thinking. They're preparing for this major war, and they're trying to provoke it as well. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg will propose establishing a $100 billion 5-year fund for Ukraine when the alliance's foreign ministers meet on Wednesday. So the idea is to lock in long-term support for Ukraine amid uncertainty around U.S. aid to Ukraine, as the $60 billion that President Biden is seeking for the proxy war still hasn't been authorized by Congress. The plan is also meant to prevent any future U.S. president from withdrawing support from Ukraine. So Financial Times described this as Trump-proofing the proxy war, since the former president has expressed opposition to the conflict, although recently he was talking about how they should just loan the money to Ukraine. So Politico reported that one idea would involve the 32 members of the alliance contributing to this $100 billion fund at the same rate that they contribute to NATO's budget. That, of course, would put most of the burden on the U.S. The U.S. pays for 2/3 of NATO's budget. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, he has vowed that he will stay in the Senate to fight against what he called an isolationist movement within the GOP, referring to Republicans who oppose the proxy war in Ukraine. So earlier this year, McConnell, who's 82 years old, he said that he would step down from his position as the Senate GOP leader this November after nearly 2 decades. In a radio interview on Monday, McConnell said that he will stay in the Senate despite stepping down from that position, at least until his term ends in 2026. McConnell said, quote, "I'm particularly involved in actually fighting back against the isolationist movement in my own party and some in the other as well. And the symbol of that lately is, are we going to help Ukraine or not? I've got this sort of on my mind for the next couple of years as something I'm going to focus on," end quote. So he's saying he's staying in Senate to fight against this. And McConnell has been leading the charge in the Senate on the Ukraine proxy war and previously declared arming Ukraine is the #1 priority for Republicans in Congress. And during this interview, it was interesting. He also discussed Rand Paul, who's the other Republican senator from Kentucky. And Rand Paul has been consistently opposed to arming Ukraine. And McConnell said he was worried that more people in the Republican Party are thinking like Rand Paul. He said, quote, "What's made it more troublesome is, it seems to me, others are heading in that direction, making arguments that are easily refuted." I mean, his arguments are easily refuted, I would say. And then he went on to say that the U.S. isn't losing any troops. The Ukrainians are the only ones doing the fighting, basically saying Ukrainians are dying. Who cares about that? Let's keep this thing going. And of course, he's calling these Republicans isolationists, which is an old smear tactic to they always use against opponents of wars. And that doesn't fit most of these Republicans. The vast majority, virtually all of them, support arming Israel to support the slaughter in Gaza. And the majority of them also think the U.S. should be building up its military in the Asia-Pacific to prepare for a future war with China. In fact, unfortunately, a lot of the opposition, the Republican opposition to arming Ukraine, is rooted in this idea that, well, we should be using these resources over there. So there's also that aspect to it.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
We got a bunch of fools running the show. It's a freak show.
It's a gloomy, dark time in America, Gerald. It's dark for civil liberties. It's dark for war and peace. It's dark for government unlawfulness all over the world. I mean, the Israeli government follows no law and makes up its own rules as it goes along. Joe Biden is trying to play it both sides. He's meeting with Muslim leaders in the White House today. What the hell is he going to tell them? He's sending 2,000-pound bombs to a criminal regime to slaughter innocents, and he's going to say something that somehow makes that behavior acceptable. The assault on First Amendment free speech rights in this country is regular, consistent, systematic, and at all levels of government. And the public is not happy. They're not happy with the choice of Biden versus Trump. They're not happy with taxes. They're not happy with debt. They're not happy with war. It's a gloomy, down, sad time in American history.
Judge, I want to talk about this article you have. The government attacks the freedom of speech. And you have a quote here from Voltaire. "I do not agree with a word that you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." He'd be dead. They kill him.
You're right. You're right. The government engaged in 4 poorly publicized, except for one, the last one involving Trump, assaults on freedom of speech in 1 week.
1 week.
States of Texas and South Dakota enacted legislation ordering all government schools from pre-K to grad school and professional school to punish anti-Semitic speech. How can the government decide what speech is anti-Semitic? How can the government possibly punish any speech? Okay, at the same time that happened, 3 FBI agents visited a lady in Stillwater, Oklahoma, knocked on her door and said, "We want to talk to you about your social media postings." She says to them, "Where's your warrant?" They say, "We don't have a warrant." She goes, "I have free speech. I'm not going to talk to you." "Oh, we just want to ask you a few questions." Show me your ID. I showed it to you. "Show me your ID again. I want to take a picture of it." She was filming the whole thing. They refused to show the ID so that she can take a picture. She closed the door and says, "Please leave." In my column, I advised she should have called the local police. Said, "There are 3 people on my front porch with guns and they're harassing me." That would have sent about 10 police cars there in a heartbeat. Then the FBI would have to explain what the hell they were doing, evaluating somebody's speech. The 4th of these is equally as outrageous. It's the judicial branch suppressing speech. It's the judge in Trump's criminal trial, which begins in 10 days in New York City, prohibiting Trump from criticizing the judge's daughter. Now, you may say, what does Trump care about the judge's daughter? Is she a little girl? No. The daughter is a grown woman who raises money for Democratic candidates. Okay, she can do that. And she uses the trial of Trump before her father as a fundraising instrument. And this judge is saying you can't criticize my daughter for doing that? That is an outright direct suppression of political speech of a guy running for president of the United States. All four of these things happened in 1 week, and they show, Gerald, the antipathy that government has toward its principal job, which is to defend our freedoms, to defend the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. The Chris Wray FBI, Trump appointed him, lamented it many times, regretted it many times. The Chris Wray FBI has taken 1/3 of the FBI manpower and assets. You ready for this? Sounds like George Orwell. And put them into predicting crime. Not solving it, predicting it. That's how sad things are in America today. This FBI agent did say to this lady on the tape, some of us spend all week interviewing people about their social media activity. All week interviewing people, the government asking you to explain what you meant by your freedom of speech when you are criticizing the president of the United States. The lady was criticizing, as you and I do. She was actually a lot more temperate than you and I are, criticizing Biden in Gaza. And that they wanted her to justify. She basically told them very politely, go fly a kite.
I want to go back to your article because there's a couple of things, with all due respect. Again, you keep writing about, you said, about the great freedom continuously pushes back at government that assaults it. The freedom of speech is a value and metaphor for unique, indefeasible, permanent, natural right to think as you wish, to say what you think, to read what you please, to publish what you say, and to do all this without a government permission slip and without fear of government reprisal. Now, this is what I wanted to say, the point I want to make. You keep using the term government permission, government reprisal. We have to stop using this word government. It's individual pieces of crap. We call it a government. They're individual pieces of scum, but we put them under a label of a government.
Yeah.
You call Hitler a government? You call Mussolini a government? You call Biden and Netanyahu a government? Do you call that little scum that you mentioned, you didn't mention his name, Mike Johnson, the evangelical Christian playing House Speaker? It's not a government, it's a crime syndicate.
It is. It is a crime syndicate. Framers gave us a government that needed our consent to do anything. Today, we have a government that we need its consent to do everything. Ayn Rand called that an inversion. It's the exact opposite of what the country was founded on.
Yep.
It happened gradually over time, but it's here.
The Peter Schiff Show. To it. Now, what is Gold telling the Fed? Because this is what Greenspan would have heard, right? Because that's why he looked at it. The price of gold is moving up. And this says that you're too easy. And how do we know we're too easy? Well, the Fed is going to cut rates. In fact, they reiterated, Powell had a speech last week, and he reiterated that they're on track for, 2 or 3 rate cuts this year. Despite all of this evidence that is being downplayed by the media, that inflation is about to get worse. Look, oil prices hit a 5-month high today. We're just at $84 a barrel now. But look at the chart. It's going much higher. Look at commodities. The CRB was up again today. We're up about 13% so far this year. Think about that. 13%. It's just one quarter. The first quarter ended. I think for the first quarter, we were up 12%. And now we're up almost another percent today in the first day of the second quarter. Now, last year, 2023, the CRB was basically flat the entire year. Now, it went up quite a bit in 2022. But last year, it kind of flatlined. It went sideways all year. This year, we're already up 13%, and we're at the first day of April. Now, does that seem consistent with lower inflation, a falling CPI? Should the CPI be lower in 2024 than it was in 2023, when commodity prices are already up 13% in 2024, and they weren't up at all in 2023. All of the data that we're getting shows that the CPI is about to head a lot higher. And all the other reports that we get show, we got more reports that came out today on ISM that showed tremendous pricing pressure in these reports. So we have all this evidence. The Fed says they're data dependent. Well, why are they ignoring all of this data that says everything they're saying about inflation is BS? I mean, Powell keeps saying, yes, we're confident. We think inflation is going to go back down to 2%. Why? Why should it do that? What gives him this confidence? Just because he's raised interest rates up to 5.25%? Big deal. That's not a high rate of interest, especially when you have a big inflation problem like the one we got now. Now, if the Fed only got 2% inflation 1 year from 1966 to 1996, what makes Powell so confident that the next 30 years are going to be 2% every year? Or maybe miss it this next year and then it goes down there. Why should that happen? In fact, why is he so confident that the inflation problem has been solved? We just had this huge breakout in inflation. We had a year of 9.1%. We've pulled back a bit, but that's it. That means we can start cutting rates. I look back too at the evolution of inflation in the 1970s. So you can see it. You go back and look at these charts, the statistics on the internet. But inflation was picking up in the 1960s. And it was because of the deficit spending of that time. The government was running these big deficits. They called it guns and butter, right? The guns was the military, and the butter was the welfare state, the Great Society programs. Where did the government get all the money to pay for all this stuff? Well, it borrowed it, right? They ran deficits and they printed a lot of money. And so naturally, the consequence was inflation, rising prices. So it started in the 60s rather. And inflation peaked out. I wrote it down at 6.2% was 1969, a summer of love, right? Well, Americans weren't loving what was going on with prices in 1969. 6.2%. Now, that was alarming, right? People were complaining at the time. Now, inflation came back down. And in 1971 and 1972, the CPI was 3.3 and 3.4, right? Not 2%. Of course, they weren't talking about a 2% target back then, right? That's new. But it was a big drop, right? The inflation rate got cut in half from that 6.2. And back then, the Fed was saying, okay, mission accomplished, inflation's back under control because it had come down. The very next year, right, inflation jumped up to 8.7. And the year after that, it was 12.2 or 12.4. Where was that? 12.3. 12.3. 2 years after being 3.2, it was 12.3. And the Fed was very optimistic that the inflation problem was solved in 71 and 72. And then, of course, it got worse and worse and worse. It didn't really start coming down until 1982, right, with Paul Volcker and the stuff he had to do. But it's interesting because the Fed was just as confident that the inflation problem was over in 1972 as they are right now. But if you actually look at the fundamentals, the Fed actually has more reason to be worried that inflation isn't over now than it did back then. We're in much worse shape. The budget deficits that we've monetized are far bigger, right? We have a much bigger problem. Interest on the national debt now is over $1 trillion. It's running on that pace. If you annualize, what we're paying now over 12 months, we're at $1 trillion a year, which again is more than national defense. But by sometime in 2025, sometime next year, interest on the national debt, if rates just stay where they are, right, it's going to be $2 trillion a year, which will mean that we're spending more money paying interest on the debt than we spend on Social Security or Medicare, which are enormous problems on their own. But how can we even survive as a nation with that high an interest rate? A bill. And the creditors are going to know that. That's the other warning that Gold is sending out.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
There is a realignment taking place, and I think that it's really important that people consider what that means, as I've detailed in past episodes, so I won't go into in depth with it. But if the U.S. dollar stops being the reserve currency of the world, hyperinflation ensues quite rapidly. I mean, not overnight per se, but certainly within a few years, as all of the contracts that are used to settle not just debts, but contracts all over the world stop being settled in US dollars, but rather in whatever the new BRICS currency is, or the yuan or yen or whatever, well, then those US dollars, which are sitting all overseas to the tune of trillions and trillions, start to come home. You understand how economics works, right? That supply and demand. The supply of the currency domestically would increase tremendously, and your demand isn't going to keep up. I mean, the demand for dollars is always there, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to create too much supply of fiat currency chasing too few goods, which means serious inflation. I won't say hyperinflation, but it's going to be bad inflation. And all of these countries are aligning themselves together, and all of them are pretty much uniformly dismissing the global hegemon. They are saying, we don't care. We've heard all of your bluff and bluster. We've felt the earth shake as your bombs have been dropped on us or your guns have been fired. We ain't playing along anymore. I mean, really let it sink in. Let that inflection point in human history rattle your core and process what it means. Now, I'm not saying it's entirely a bad thing, because I think that it's inevitably going to come to pass regardless. But the important thing, as I've been saying forever, is that it comes to pass without a world war. That is everything. That is all that really matters. We can certainly survive a global economic reset. It would be extraordinarily painful, but humanity will adjust, survive, and ultimately thrive on the tail end of it. We cannot survive a world war. I really don't believe we can. There's too many nuclear armed powers. There's too many egotistical, psychopathic technocrats that are reckless beyond words, beyond belief. You cannot have a world war in this environment with these nations being the parties involved. But the paradigm shift is so obviously on its face happening, and you don't have any American political representatives really telling you the truth about it.
On the strike in Damascus, does the U.S. expect Iran to retaliate, and if so, how?
Well, I can't predict what the Supreme Leader and what the IRGC will decide to do or not. I don't know in terms of retaliation. I assume you mean against the United States. Let me make it clear. We had nothing to do with what the strike in Damascus. We weren't involved in any way whatsoever. So the comments by the Iranian foreign minister that somehow we're to be held to account or that we're to blame is just nonsense. We had nothing to do with it. We will, as we always have, take our force protection very seriously to protect our troops and our facilities in Iraq and Syria. And as we have demonstrated in the past, as President Biden has made very, very clear through the actions he has ordered, we will do what we need to do to protect those troops and facilities.
Can anyone explain to me why we were still standing by our greatest ally? If you're going to say, which he is saying explicitly, we had nothing to do with this attack, and for those that are totally in the dark as to what transpired, about 48 hours ago, the IDF, or the Israeli government, I don't know if it was specifically the IDF, Special Forces or whatever, they launched missile attacks on the embassy in Syria for Iran. Now, for those that are totally in the dark about how international law works, I'm certainly not a specialist on it, but one thing I do know is that embassies are kind of a sacred thing. You remember how Julian Assange had to hide out in the Ecuadorian embassy for years and years? Well, yeah. The reason he was able to do that is because embassies are supposed to be perceived as essentially existing within the land of the foreign nation. So if you have an Iranian embassy that's inside Syria and you strike that, that is a direct attack on Iran itself. So why is it that we're going to stand beside this country who was responsible of violating international law? The whole reason, the whole justification of arming the Ukrainians to the last Ukrainian was that, what? Ladies and gentlemen, say it with me now. We must defend democracy. We must maintain the international liberal world order, the rules-based international order. What rules are they talking about? Well, they're talking about international law. They have argued from the beginning, totally unprovoked. Vladimir Putin violated international law because he invaded a nation without getting NATO authorization or whatever, UN Council approval. So, how is it different? Make that case. Explain to me. Explain to me how it's any different in what Israel did to Iran by striking not just their embassy inside of Syria, but blowing up many of their top generals that were allegedly there. Such dangerous provocation. And for the life of me, I cannot see how it benefits either our nation or our people. I can't see it. I'm not feigning incredulity here. I do not see the benefit by risking World War III to defend Israel as they obliterate everyone and everything, and we're just to sit here and say, that's fine. Okay, cool. How much more money would you like? F-15s coming right up. Let's send them some nukes while we're at it. Whatever. Everything's cool. I mean, this is so totally totally unbelievable that this is happening. And let me just quickly say, God bless these reporters. They are not relenting. This is like the 7th question in a row, practically, that's about these issues that are really, really important. I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked that you could actually get a press corps in America at the White House to ask hard-hitting questions. This is why I wanted to play this for you guys, because it's so rare.
Episode, but let's start out with an article published by Mike Meharry the other day, Utah's step-by-step strategy against the surveillance state. And he starts out with this. It's an important point. When it comes to political activism, a lot of people think they have to accomplish everything all at once. Especially the more that you love liberty, the more that you recognize that all these government programs, well, behind it is the barrel of a gun. They're enforced through, well, force and violence, coercion. And so the proper mentality, the principle says we got to get rid of all of it. But if we want to be smart about strategy, we have to recognize that you're not going to get from point A to point Z, from the largest government in history, the largest empire, to a real land of the free in one fell swoop. And Mike writes they propose or demand what amounts to little more than an all or nothing strategy. But that's actually the worst approach because it almost never works. We almost never see this type of thing work. And on Monday's episode, I took things back to 1774. In response to the coercive or intolerable acts, the old revolutionaries took a very specific strategy. And I shared with you 3 key elements directly from them that are essential for a successful pushback against what we once again have, the largest government in history. 1, the necessity of the times requires it. 2, it can't be the probable source of a greater evil than you're experiencing right now. And 3, it also has to have a probability, not just a possibility or theoretical chance of success. And I think number 3 is the one that most seem to miss, because probability of success means you really never go from despotism to liberty, from what we have today to a real land of the free in one fell swoop. That just doesn't happen. But anyways, let's get to Utah here, because Utah is really putting this Thomas Jefferson, John Dickinson strategy into practice specifically against the surveillance state. They're also putting it in practice in support of sound money. And Mike Meharry's working on another article this week and next to discuss that. And I'll probably do an episode on that as well, because we want to see how the same strategy is working on various things. I'm kind of surprised to see Utah taking the lead on this. But as I've looked at this over the years, I keep seeing another piece of legislation get introduced and passed. It's another small step forward. And then they move another step forward on a previously passed thing. And this is exactly what we were told to do. So Mike says, think about it. If you were starving, you wouldn't turn down a slice of bread just because it wasn't the whole loaf. And I bet you wouldn't turn it down even if you were allergic to gluten, right? You'd eat the slice and then continue looking for more. This is exactly the approach that Utah has taken to push back against the surveillance state. And he points out, and we've only really looked at this very closely since about 2013, and there could be some steps before that we could research, and maybe some people in Utah would be able to inform us. But generally, we see 2013 as a starting point for when they really started trying to protect privacy. For more than a decade, starting in 2013, Mike writes, the Utah legislature has incrementally built some of the most robust privacy protections in the country with a step-by-step approach. Over that time, Utah chipped away at the surveillance state, passing at least 8 separate laws limiting surveillance. 2013, and we're going to start there with the Automatic License Plate Reader System Act, ALPRs. I've covered these on many episodes. They can actually, the technology is as fast as, I don't know if it was 800 or 1,000 captured plates per minute. These things are incredibly powerful. They store all the data. They often store it for life. Then they share it through fusion centers to basically every other law enforcement agency in the country on a state, local, and federal level. So then people who have really nefarious ideas like the ATF and the DEA, buddies in crime, partners in crime, agencies that shouldn't exist. The only thing they're authorized to do is disband, but they continue doing stuff. But they love license plate tracking because they want to know who's gone to a weed store and then purchased a firearm, or has gone to a certain protest and then purchased a firearm. They want to know where you are, when you are, and some of these things even have facial recognition in them so that you can determine who's the passenger. So they're tracking people, building profiles on people through metadata and, well, direct information as well. So in 2013, Utah took a very small first step. We didn't really even cover it here. They put some modest limits on the government use of license plate readers, as well as the sharing of captured plate data. Very small step forward. Then in 2014, they passed what was called the Electronic Information Privacy Act. That made any electronic data obtained by law enforcement without a warrant inadmissible in a criminal proceeding. This includes data gathered by the NSA. So the NSA has a program called parallel construction. So does the FBI. What they do is they collect a bunch of information without a warrant. They violate the Fourth Amendment. They violate your privacy. They violate your rights. And then they find something and they hand it off through something known as the Special Operations Division, SOD, or they use fusion centers. There's about 80 of these around the country, and they share the information with local law enforcement. And law enforcement then is supposed to pretend that they didn't know that they had the information, and they're given instructions oftentimes in this thing called parallel construction to come up with a way to pretend that they got the information with a warrant. So this actually bans this practice. Whether or not has been effective or not on that, I think is hard to tell. But of course, it's an important first step to just say, look, you guys got to stop doing this. So it includes data gathered by the NSA and shared through the super secret Special Operations Division or fusion centers. The new law also stops Utah law enforcement from obtaining phone location data without a warrant. Here's how Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, put it in his great essay writing under the pen name Candidus in the Boston Gazette. This was the publication that was really the mouthpiece for the Sons of Liberty back in 1771. He said, instead of sitting down satisfied with the efforts we have already made, which is the wish of our enemies, the necessity of the times, more than ever, calls for our utmost circumspection, deliberation, fortitude, and perseverance. And if you think about the timing of that in 1771, he was saying, okay, things have chilled out a little bit right now, but if we just kind of rest our hats and we're just cool and everything's good, we have to recognize that that's exactly what our enemies want us to do. If they just kind of back down or you beat them on one thing, but you don't look at the underlying major problem and you don't continue to push forward for what is yet to get, as Thomas Jefferson put it, you are helping the other side. So as long as we keep seeing small moves forward, then we're seeing a positive step for liberty.
California, as you may have heard, Dr. Paul, they're going to make everyone rich. They just raised the minimum age to $20 an hour. It doesn't matter what you do, bike messenger, whatever, minimum wage, $20 an hour, everyone's going to get a living wage. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. As you know better than anyone else, it causes the prices to go up.
Boy, that's for sure. And they ignore some fundamental principles in economics.
Yeah.
And this is bred into the system, because even the businessman, answers these questions in a sort of a pragmatic way, not on a philosophic way of, government shouldn't be in the business. Why should government be involved in setting wages? All activity in a free society should be voluntary, but no, who's going to direct it? Isn't it amazing how quickly they passed that law? I think the governor suggested it, and they passed that law in no time.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if they had that around. But that is really, really dumb.
Yeah.
And the record will be, that there's going to be it's not going to work. Some people will be fired. The companies are going to make less money, and companies are going to go bankrupt, and costs are going to go up. So the consumer and even the worker is not going to benefit other than for a week or two.
Yeah.
Because it does push all prices up too.
Yeah.
So that won't be a solution. But they start with the principle, well, you have to have good management, and you have to find out what 51% want. You have to have the majority tell us what to do. And all of a sudden we have this mess out there. And then they say, well, if there's a mess, and that's what's wrong with free enterprise. Look at what it's given us.
Yeah. Well, they're going to, what's going to happen is you got to pay the burger flipper $20 an hour. Well, that means the burger is going to start costing $20. and then what's Newsom going to do? He's going to say, you are gouging people with these high prices. We're going to force you to lower the prices. And the franchise owners are going to say, okay, we'll go belly up. We'll just close the whole thing down.
Yeah, boy, there's one out there that owns a lot of these franchises.
Yeah.
Just think how many people have been very happy with him, or he wouldn't have grown that. He grew because he provided the service and the price was right.
Yeah.
Now they want to come in, they won't be able to provide the service, and the prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
And the other people, somebody was describing the average person, working in these fast food places, and they're usually young people, or it's a second job, and they're in college and working their way through, and a lot of them are going to, suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Oh, $20 an hour. When the minimum wage used to be $5 or $6, they would propose, well, we have to raise. There'd be a big argument. We have to raise it about $1.50. That's what we think they should have.
Yeah.
And some of us would argue, well, if it's so good, why don't you make it $15? Thinking it would be so absurd.
Yeah.
So, oh, okay.
Hold my
Then
beer.
before you knew it, that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Now it's $20 an hour. Oh, somebody said, one of the congresswomen suggested 50.
Yeah, 50. Yeah, that's what we need.
That was so outrageous. They said, oh no, we want sanity in what we're doing.
Well, it's not only kids that are working in these places, but a lot of retirees.
Yeah.
That's tough to live on that Social Security if you're able to do it, and I think they also like it for a little bit of the social aspect as well. It helps keep them keep the mind moving and a little bit of money coming in, they're going to be gone.
You know, there's statistics now showing that the measuring the employment, the number of people employed, it's 800,000 overstated. Because let's say you have somebody working in there, he's on Social Security, and he goes back and works 15, 20 hours a week, new job. You know, he's desperate to survive. And he has a new job, and they put him down on the list. They found out that there's very few new jobs that are productive jobs. In the old days, it was an industry that was developing, and the computer industry, and new people, and they had jobs that they were producing stuff or services. But so often now it's a gimmickry. So this you can hardly say, oh, this is a solid job. Maybe I can get rid of one of my jobs. $20 an hour, boy, and I'll take all the overtime. And yet, what happened? He goes from 8 hours down to 4 hours a day or something.
Well, let's put it up. This is from the New York Post, but it's all around. And as you point out, this is about a person who has several McDonald's franchises. Put that, go back one, please. There we go. McDonald's franchisee raises prices after California minimum wage law, but he won't charge $20 for a Happy Meal. And interesting, I like this, the article underneath it. Panera Bread has been exempted from the $20 minimum wage requirement after the owner donated to California governor. How about corruption in California? But so here's the franchise owner. To go to the next clip. And as you say, Dr. Paul, very successful man. He owns a bunch of franchises, but he makes a very good and simple point. As a business owner, when you're dealing with this kind of extraordinary overnight change, you know, a 25% increase in wages. No stone has to remain unturned, Roderick told CNN. And go to the next one. Now here's some more unintended consequences. Here we go. The new law also forced Roderick to rethink large capital expenses. He will postpone renovating the dining room and hold off on plans to buy new grills and rooftop air conditioning machines. So that's economics. That's just basic stuff, right? He doesn't want to fire people, and so he's going to have to hold off on renovations and things to make it better.
You know, people who want special interest and special power and unearned income, they have to believe in that system, because the other one, you have to have some talent, and you have to be a manager. People don't want to recognize that. So if the manager, he has all these, what right does he have to have all those franchises? Well, who voted him to do that? Well, the good democracy is when the consumer is the voter. And if they come to his store and supports him, that is a real vote for liberty and personal choices. But that's not when they do this. This is the elimination of the benefits coming from personal choices. But they do it in everything. They do it in foreign policy, they do it in economic policy, and they do it in all social events, thinking that, oh, well, we have to do this because they're doing something we don't like, and so they regulate everything. So that's why I think keep it simple, and that is everything should be voluntary. As long and have one rule. You have to have one rule, which would be more powerful because it's a moral rule, and as you can't hurt other people, you can't steal.
Simple.
Oh boy, that's brilliant.
You'll put the government out of business. That's what they do.
That's it.